The gravel crunched beneath Cal Thompson's boots as he stepped out of the rental truck, the cold Oregon wind cutting through his flannel like it had unfinished business. Trees towered on either side of the narrow path, hunched with age and silence. The cabin stood at the end of it, timber walls weathered grey, porch sagging under years of rain and neglect. A name carved into a wooden post had nearly faded into moss. Thompson. He stared at it for a moment, jaw clenched. He hadn't seen this place in 20 years, not since the war, not since Daniel stopped calling. The air felt too quiet. No birds, no creaking branches, just the wind. Then came the growl, low, guttural, not a bark, something deeper. Cal froze, one boot still on the bottom step. From the shadows beneath the porch, a shape moved. A German shepherd limped forward slowly, its fur a sun-faded mix of grey and sable, one hind leg dragging with effort, eyes locked on Cal with a stillness that didn't belong to animals. The dog didn't bark, didn't flinch, just watched. "You must be Gunner," Cal said, raising his hand slowly. "Easy, old boy. I come in peace." Gunner didn't move. The growl stayed, a soft rumble vibrating through the planks. He stopped just out of reach, ears pinned back, muscles tense, tail still. In those eyes, Cal didn't see fear. He saw judgment. It had been 15 years since he and Daniel last spoke. A phone call that ended in shouting. Then silence. And now, a lawyer's letter. Daniel was dead. Heart failure, the paperwork said. Neat. Final. But nothing about this place felt final. Gunner inched closer, nose twitching as if testing Cal for some unseen scent. The dog's coat was scarred in places, one old wound near the ribs half hidden beneath fur. Not a pet, not some backyard watchdog. This was a dog that had lived through things. "Yeah," Cal muttered, lowering his hand. "You and me both." He reached into the truck cab and pulled out the old duffel bag that had followed him through 3 deployments and too many cheap motels. Tossed it over his shoulder. Gunner's ears twitched, but he didn't retreat. As Cal passed, the dog turned, still watching. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with dust, pine, and something metallic just beneath the surface. Cal set the bag down and stood in the middle of the room, the wooden floor creaking beneath him like a memory resisting his weight. The furniture hadn't changed. The books on the shelf were still alphabetized, Daniel's compulsion preserved like he'd stepped out for groceries. But what struck Cal most was the silence. It wasn't peaceful. It was waiting. Gunner stood just inside the door now, head low, ears angled forward like radar. When Cal took a step toward the hallway, the dog growled again, sharper this time. Cal froze. "Relax, I'm just looking." The growl deepened. Then, without warning, Gunner moved. Not toward Cal, but toward the hallway. He positioned himself in front of one closed door, Daniel's old room, and lay down. Not guarding. Blocking. Cal stared at him. The message was clear. Not yet. He exhaled, stepped back. The tension dropped an inch. Gunner rested his head on his paws, but his eyes stayed open. Later, Cal stood in the kitchen, staring at the coffee tin on the counter. Half full, no mold, which meant someone had been here recently. He opened the lid and winced. The smell was off. Bitter, not stale. Wrong in a way he couldn't explain. He dumped it in the trash. That night, the fire wouldn't catch. The wood was too damp, the matches too cheap. Cal sat on the old couch, rubbing his hands together for warmth. Gunner stayed curled near the door, unmoving. "You don't sleep much, do you?" Cal asked. The dog didn't respond. Hours passed. The cold settled in. Cal pulled his coat tighter and leaned back. Exhaustion crept in like fog, slow and heavy. The kind that came with too many nights on the road and too many bottles with no answers at the bottom. At some point, he must have dozed off. He woke with a start, not from a sound but from a weight, something light but present across his legs. He blinked, vision adjusting to the silver-blue moonlight pouring through the window cracks. A blanket, draped unevenly over him. He sat up fast, looking around. Gunnar was no longer by the door. The dog stood near the chair where the blanket had been, panting, watching. Cal's throat tightened. "You dragged this over?" Gunnar didn't move, just turned and padded back to his spot. The blanket smelled like dust and cedar. Cal ran a hand over it, rough wool scraping his fingers. He'd been bitten by this dog that morning. Now he'd been tucked in by him. He looked toward the hallway again. The door to Daniel's room was still shut, but now, for the first time, Gunnar wasn't blocking it. Cal lay back down, staring at the beams overhead, the blanket up to his chest, the cabin crackling in the quiet like it was trying to remember how to breathe. He closed his eyes and whispered, not sure if to the dog or the brother he never got to forgive. "You knew something, didn't you?" Gunnar didn't answer. But Cal felt the truth curling in the corners of the room, the weight of it heavier than dust, heavier than grief. And the dog watched, silent, waiting, not for a command, but for a reckoning. The morning crept in beneath the edges of the shutters, a thin grey light filtering through dust-laced slats. Cal stood at the window with a chipped mug of black coffee, staring at the frost-glazed pines. He hadn't slept much. Gunnar hadn't moved from his spot near the door. They were two sentinels keeping a cold kind of watch over something neither could name. After the third sip of coffee that tasted more like burnt wood than beans, Cal set the mug down and got to work. The cabin was no longer abandoned, but it hadn't yet accepted that someone new had moved in. Cobwebs hung like memories in the corners, shelves sagged under the weight of old field guides and philosophy texts. Dust coated everything, a soft and suffocating kind of silence. Cal pulled on a pair of worn gloves and started in the living room, tossing out mouldy blankets and papers yellowed beyond recognition. He worked in silence, except for the occasional creak of the floorboards and the low, ever-present breathing of Gunnar nearby. The dog watched him, eyes never far from Cal's hands, especially when he moved too close to the hallway. Mid-morning, Cal made the mistake of brushing past the door to Daniel's bedroom. The explosion of barking was immediate. Gunnar sprang up, his bark sharp and cutting, no trace of the aging limp in his body now. He charged between Cal and the door, planting himself like a barricade. Hackles raised, lips pulled back. "Whoa, whoa!" Cal backed up, hands raised instinctively. "I'm just cleaning." Easy. Soldier Gunnar didn't bite, but he didn't budge either. The message was clear. Not yet. Cal stepped away, circling back to the kitchen. Only then did the barking stop. Gunnar resumed his position, sprawled across the doorway, like the gatekeeper of something not yet ready to be unearthed. Outside, the cold sun climbed lazily above the trees. Around noon, Cal grabbed his keys and headed into town. He needed real coffee. Maybe a couple of answers, too. Pine Hollow was one of those towns that looked like it had been caught in a snow globe and shaken just enough to stir the dust. A single main street, a few shops, a gas station, and a diner with a neon open sign that flickered like it wasn't convinced. Inside, the warmth smelled of bacon grease and burnt sugar. Locals sat in booths murmuring about snowmelt, elk sightings, and truck repairs, the kind of talk that filled space but avoided weight. When Cal walked in, heads turned. Not long, just enough to register. He looked like someone they didn't recognize, but maybe should have. He slid into a stool at the counter. A woman in her 50s approached, apron faded, hair tied up in a messy knot. "You're Daniel's brother," she said, pouring coffee before he asked. "Thought you might show up." Cal nodded. "Yeah, I'm Cal." She gave a polite smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Marie. Ran this place for 20 years. I was real sorry to hear about Daniel Cal sipped. The coffee was bad, but not terrible. They said it was his heart." "That's what the paper said," Marie replied. Her eyes flicked toward the back of the diner. "He kept to himself. Always did. Liked it that way. Anyone with him when it happened?" "No, found him a day later, I think. Neighbor heard Gunnar howling. Poor dog didn't leave the porch for days after." Cal felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "He ever mention feeling sick?" Marie shook her head. "Not to me. But like I said, Daniel didn't talk much. Smart man. A little intense." He pushed further. "Did he have any problems with anyone?" "Disagreements." Her pause was brief, but heavy. "Not that I know of." But the way she avoided his eyes said otherwise. Cal didn't press. Not yet. He paid in cash and left a tip that made her blink. "Take care of that dog?" she called after him. "He's a good one." Back at the cabin, the light had shifted. It pooled through the cracks differently now. Longer shadows, colder edges. Gunnar was back in his position near the door. Cal walked past him slowly, offering a glance that was almost an apology. "I get it," he said. "You're guarding something." The dog didn't growl, but he didn't move either. Cal turned his attention to the kitchen, brushing dust off shelves, wiping down the counter. As he reached for a box of old maps on the floor, his boot caught the corner of a rug. It bunched up underfoot. He stepped back, bent down to fix it, then stopped. Something dark peeked out from beneath the frayed corner. He pulled the rug aside. A stain. Dark, irregular, nearly black against the pale floorboards. Cal crouched down, touched it gently with gloved fingers. Rubbed, dry, flaky, familiar, blood. His stomach clenched. This wasn't a nosebleed on tile. This was a pool, the kind that took time to dry, the kind that marked the moment someone stopped being alive. "Heart failure," he muttered. Gunnar stood now, silent, watching from the hallway. Cal looked at him. "You saw what happened, didn't you?" The dog didn't move, but his stare was unwavering. He remembered what Marie said. The dog howled for days, but nobody had mentioned blood on the floor. No police tape, no reports of trauma. So either they missed it, or they covered it. He stood, eyes sweeping the room now with a soldier's instinct. The scratch marks near the table legs, the odd placement of furniture, the faint scent beneath the must and wood smoke, something metallic and wrong. Someone had been here after Daniel died, maybe even before, and they'd wanted it to look clean. But Gunnar had stayed, guarded, waited. That night, Cal didn't drink. He sat by the hearth, fire finally burning after hours of coaxing. Gunnar lay nearby, breathing slow, eyes closed, but not sleeping, always listening. Cal reached down, fingers brushing over the thick fur between the dog's shoulders. Gunnar didn't flinch. "You know something," he whispered. Something they buried with him. The fire cracked. The wind pressed against the windows, and somewhere beneath the floorboards, beneath the silence and the lies and the dust, the truth waited. And the dog was the only one who'd stayed behind to guard it. The day turned colder, that sharp, dry kind of mountain cold that slips through your clothes and settles in your joints. Cal didn't light the fire that morning. He needed to move. Sitting too long in that cabin made the memories feel louder. He spent the first hour reorganizing the bookshelves, stacking Daniel's endless collection of field journals, naturalist manuals, and philosophy texts. Titles about solitude, stoicism, endurance. Cal ran his fingers over the cracked spines. His brother had always lived in his head. Cal had lived with a rifle and an exit plan. Two boys raised under the same roof who'd grown into men on different planets. Gunnar watched from his spot near the hallway, body still, but eyes locked. When Cal moved toward Daniel's bedroom again, the dog stirred. But this time, Cal didn't try the door. Instead, he grabbed a broom and started clearing out the spare room. Dust and pine needles, crumpled papers, an old coat rack with one of Daniel's worn jackets still hanging, its sleeves stiff with time. Midday, Cal found himself standing at the built-in dresser near the far wall. This wasn't the bedroom, just a utility space Daniel used for storage. One of the drawers was jammed shut. It had always been stuck, even when they were kids. Curiosity got the better of him. Cal crouched, gripped the brass handle, and gave it a steady pull. It creaked open an inch, resisting. Gunnar barked. Cal froze. He turned. The dog stood, stiff-legged, ears sharp, tail still. "I'm not touching your bone stash." Cal muttered. He turned back to the drawer, tugged again. The snarl came like a thunderclap, and then teeth. In a blur of fur and motion, Gunnar lunged. Cal barely had time to shield himself before the jaws clamped around his forearm, deep and fast. "Shit!" he shouted, jerking back instinctively. The pain was sharp, like fire under the skin. Blood bubbled through torn flannel. He staggered, crashing into the dresser behind him. Gunnar backed off immediately, but didn't retreat. The dog stood between Cal and the drawer, breath heaving, eyes wild, not from rage, from fear. Cal looked down at his arm. A clean puncture, not a mauling. A warning. He sat on the floor, back against the dresser, clutching his arm with a hand that trembled harder than it should have. "Okay," he breathed, wincing. "Okay." Message received. Gunnar paced once, then settled by the door, ears flicking at every creak of the wind outside. Cal sat there for a long time, breathing through the pain. When the adrenaline faded, the ache came alive. He cleaned the wound in the kitchen sink, teeth gritted against the sting of antiseptic, then wrapped it in an old bandana. He could have kicked the dog out, could have shouted, fought back, but he didn't. Because something about the look in Gunnar's eyes had stuck with him. That wasn't a dog protecting turf. That was a dog protecting memory. As night fell, Cal made no attempt to enter the hallway. He tossed another log onto the fire, poured himself a finger of bourbon, and settled onto the couch, arm resting stiffly against his chest. The blanket he'd used the night before was still folded over the armrest. He left it there. Pride, maybe. Or penance. Gunnar remained curled, near the kitchen. He hadn't come closer since the bite. And yet, that night, something shifted. Cal woke up shivering. The fire had gone out. His coat had slipped from his shoulders. The cold bit deep, into his ribs, into the bruises he never talked about. Then he felt it again. That weight, light, awkward, familiar, the blanket, dragged and dropped over his legs. He opened his eyes slowly. Moonlight sliced across the floor in thin slivers, glinting off the metal pot on the stove. Gunnar stood at the edge of the couch, panting softly, tail twitching in small, uncertain movements. The blanket had caught on a splinter halfway across the floor. It must have taken him time to tug it loose. Cal swallowed. "You trying to apologize?" he whispered. Gunnar didn't respond. He simply turned and settled back onto the rug, curling in tight, his back to Cal, but his ears angled backward. Listening. Always listening. Cal pulled the blanket up to his chest. The scent of old cedar clung to it. His wounded arm throbbed in time with his heartbeat. For a long moment, he just lay there, staring at the ceiling. This dog had drawn blood from him less than 12 hours ago. And now he was dragging blankets to keep him warm. Not loyalty. Not instinct. Something closer to grief. Cal didn't sleep well that night. The cold had gotten into his bones. But in the silence, in the crackle of the dying fire and the soft sound of a dog breath across the room, something had shifted. Not trust. Not yet. But maybe the beginning of it. By morning, the pain in his arm dulled to a heavy ache. He dressed slowly, careful not to wake Gunnar, who was still sleeping by the hearth, his tail twitching in dream. Cal opened the front door and stepped into the cold. The air smelled of frost and pine sap and wood smoke. He looked out toward the line of trees, where someone had once stood watching. The truth about Daniel was still buried in this place. But Cal wasn't alone in digging it out. Inside, Gunnar stirred. And for the first time, when Cal looked back, the dog met his eyes not with suspicion, but with recognition. The morning brought wind, not gentle mountain breeze, but sharp, insistent gusts that scraped through the trees like they were being punished. Cal stood outside, one boot planted on a rusted ladder rung, the other on a sagging section of the roof, hammer clenched in his fist. The cabin groaned beneath him, old nails protesting with every movement. You'd think Daniel would have reinforced this thing, he muttered, pulling up a warped shingle. Beneath, the wood was soft and blackened from years of snowmelt and silence. Below, Gunnar paced, ears twitching with every creak overhead. He didn't bark, didn't whine, just moved in circles at the base of the ladder like a sentry who couldn't climb. I'm fine, Cal called down. Relax. Gunnar stopped, stared up, unmoved. Cal shifted his weight to pry loose another board, and the world dropped. The wood gave way without warning, splintering under his boot. Cal's leg punched through, the ladder jerked sideways, and his balance went with it. He flailed, heart punching against his ribs. For a moment, all he saw was sky and treetops spinning. Then pain, blunt and jarring. His ribs slammed into the edge of the opening, and he started to fall. He would have hit the ground head first. But something yanked him sideways, hard. Teeth latched onto his jacket sleeve. No hesitation, no warning. Gunnar. The dog dug in, paws scraping against the porch, growling with effort as his weight shifted the fall just enough. Cal hit the dirt with a grunt, shoulder first instead of skull. He rolled, coughed, sucked in a breath sharp enough to cut. Above him, Gunnar stood trembling, jaw still clenched around the shredded sleeve. Cal lay there for a second, trying to make sense of the stars in his vision and the dog refusing to let go. Then Gunnar released. Jesus, Cal gasped, sitting up. You actually pulled me back. The dog's ears flicked. No triumph, just steady, silent presence. Cal exhaled hard, knees trembling. All right, that's twice now. He sat on the porch steps, ribs aching, and stared up at the hole in the roof. Gunnar circled once, then lay down beside him, his body pressed just close enough to be felt. Later that afternoon, after patching the roof with a temporary tarp and checking his range of motion, Cal returned inside to take stock of the damage. The ladder was scraped, his jacket sleeve was torn, and something else, something small, had been knocked loose from the wall during the fall. A panel, roughly cut, set low behind the couch. Cal leaned in, brow furrowed. It didn't match the rest of the pine wall. He ran his fingers along the edge, found the faint groove of a seam. He grabbed his pocket knife, wedged it in, and pried gently. The wood shifted. A hollow thunk followed. Cal knelt and pulled the panel away. Behind it, tucked inside a narrow cavity between studs, was a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. He stared at it for a second, then reached in and lifted it out. Dust fell away like ash. He laid it on the floor and unwrapped it slowly, revealing a stack of items. A faded journal, a cassette tape in a clear case, and an envelope, yellowed and creased with a single word scrawled on the front. California. His throat tightened. Daniel's handwriting. He picked it up, heart knocking hard against his chest. The envelope had no stamp, no address, just his name. His fingers hesitated at the fold, then opened it. Inside, a letter. ink smeared at the edges from damp, but legible. If you're reading this, it means Gunnar trusted you enough to stay. That's more than I could say for most men. I didn't die of heart failure. At least not the kind the coroner will write down. Things happened out here. Things I started noticing too late. They'll say I was paranoid. Maybe I was. But if you're here, you deserve to know. The rest of. The page was filled with short, jagged sentences, references to people Cal didn't recognize, notes about strangers in town, vehicles on back roads, changes in the water pressure, food that tasted wrong. Paranoia or warning? Cal flipped the letter over. On the back was a single sentence. Trust the dog. He knows what I couldn't prove. Cal set the letter down, palms slick with sweat. Gunnar was sitting across the room, head tilted, watching. You knew where it was, Cal whispered. You've been guarding it this whole time. The dog didn't move. Cal picked up the cassette. It had no label, just a date, July 14th. He dug through drawers until he found an old player buried beneath spare light bulbs and fishing lures. Dust coated the top. But when he slipped in the tape and pressed play, the mechanism groaned, then clicked. Then Daniel's voice filled the room. Okay, testing. If this works, and you're hearing it, Cal, I guess, or whoever Gunnar brings here, then you need to know I didn't imagine this. The sound of Daniel's breath echoed, close and shaky. A creak of floorboards, the clink of glass. I started noticing things about 6 months ago. People in town acting different. Men showing up asking questions about the land, about the watershed. One of them had a badge, but it wasn't local, and they didn't like that I was asking anything back. A pause. A scratch. Paper rustling. Gunnar started reacting first. He wouldn't go near the coffee, barked at the back door some nights like he was chasing ghosts. Then I found tracks near the generator. Boot prints, deep. Too deep for just a hiker. Cal leaned forward, elbows on knees, blood running cold. I don't know what's coming, but if I vanish, it's not my heart. Don't trust Sheriff Maynard. Don't trust anyone who says they're here to help. The tape clicked, then hissed into silence. Cal sat back slowly. The room seemed darker, smaller. He looked at Gunnar. You've been carrying this the whole time, haven't you? Watching, waiting for someone who'd listen. The dog shifted his weight, just slightly, but enough. Cal folded the letter, placed it back in the oilcloth, and stared down at the floor. Beneath his feet wasn't just dirt and wood. It was truth, buried under months of silence, years of distance, and a brother who hadn't trusted anyone except his dog. Cal ran a hand through his hair, then looked toward the window. The wind had picked up again. Pine branches scraped against the glass like fingernails. Something had happened here, something no coroner's report could whitewash. And whatever it was, it hadn't ended with Daniel. Not yet. The second tape was marked with a smear of grease across the plastic shell, like Daniel had handled it with dirt-streaked fingers and urgency in his blood. Cal slipped it into the player, heart tight, breath shallow. Click. A long pause. Then Daniel's voice again. This time lower, worn. If you're hearing this, it means Gunnar trusts you, which means you're probably not one of them. Cal leaned forward. Across the room, Gunnar sat upright, still and alert, his ears twitching at the sound of the voice that once commanded him. I couldn't write this down. They check mail. Phones. The landlines tapped. But I had to get it out somehow. I think they're trying to kill me. Cal's hand tightened on the player. I've seen too much. Strange trucks on the ridge roads. People I've never met knowing my name. The water from the south line started tasting metallic last week. Gunnar won't drink it. That was the first sign there was a break in the recording. A breath. A low creak. I followed one of the trucks 2 weeks ago. It turned up near the old ranger trail off Baxter Creek, middle of nowhere. 2 men met behind a broken fence. One of them was Sheriff Mark Daniels. The name hit Cal like a slap. Sheriff Daniels had been the first to shake his hand when he rolled into town. Warm grip, white teeth, friendly eyes. Too friendly. "I know it sounds crazy," Daniels' voice rasped, "but I watched him hand over a bag. Cash, I think. And I recognized the guy he gave it to. Johnny Glass. He disappeared 6 months ago after being picked up for trespassing near the reservoir. Everyone said he moved to Idaho." Another pause. A longer one. Gunnar remembers faces. He barked like hell when Glass came to the house, pretending to be a gas line inspector. That wasn't coincidence. Cal's hands were trembling now. I don't know what they're running. Drugs, chemicals, land grabs. But it's big. It's old. And Daniels is right in the middle of it. The recording hissed. Then a final line, like it had cost Daniel everything to say it. "If I end up dead, don't trust the coroner. And don't let them bury this. I'm counting on you." Or, on Gunnar. The tape clicked off. Silence fell like an avalanche. Cal sat there, frozen. Not with fear, but with fury. Daniel hadn't died of natural causes. He'd been silenced, and the only soul who'd known the truth, the only one left to guard it, had 4 legs and a limp. Gunnar had padded over during the final moments of the tape. He now stood beside Cal, not looking at him, but at the floor, like he too remembered what had been said and what had been lost. Cal reached out, resting a hand on Gunnar's shoulder. The dog didn't flinch. "Afghanistan," Cal whispered. "That's where you learn to recognize danger before it had a name." He rose, mind spinning. He grabbed the journal, the letter, and now both tapes, laying them out on the table like evidence in a war room. He started connecting dots. Johnny Glass, the inspector, the weird tasting water, Sheriff Daniels. He remembered what the deputy at the gas station had said when Cal asked where Daniel had been buried. No autopsy needed. Sheriff said it was clean. That word, again, he should have noticed it sooner. He stared at Gunnar. "You've been trying to warn me since the moment I showed up." Gunnar tilted his head, as if answering without words. Cal pulled out his phone. No signal. He already knew that. Pine Hollow was a dead zone on a good day. But this wasn't a day for phones. He needed real proof. Something not just recorded or written, but seen, found. And if Daniel had figured out where they were meeting, if he had followed them once, then maybe he'd left more than tapes. He started flipping through the journals again. This time, carefully. Reading between lines. Not just entries, but markings, coordinates, trail names, map references, Baxter Creek, South Line, Ranger Trail. There. A note in the margin, circled in shaky pen. "Old surveyor post, hollow tree, don't trust west camera." Cal stood, grabbed his coat. Gunnar rose with him immediately. "You want to come?" Gunnar was already at the door. It was snowing again, light flurries dusting the trail that curved behind the cabin into thicker trees. The cold bit through Cal's sleeves as they climbed the ridge in silence, the world muffled and grey. The woods were still, not peaceful, just expectant. After 30 minutes, Cal spotted it. An old tree, massive, rotted through the center with a jagged hole at its base wide enough for a grown man's arm. He crouched, reached in. His fingers brushed plastic, then glass. He pulled it free. A sealed mason jar. Inside, photographs, maps, and a flash drive wrapped in duct tape. He didn't smile, didn't speak. He just looked at Gunnar. And Gunnar sat. Perfect posture. Head high, like a soldier reporting for duty. On the hike back, Cal said aloud what he hadn't wanted to admit. "They killed my brother. They buried the truth. And the sheriff, the one everyone trusts, is the one running the whole thing." Gunnar trotted beside him, silent but steady. Back at the cabin, Cal lit the fire with shaking hands. He laid out everything on the table, the tapes, the maps, the drive. A web of truth slowly taking shape. He picked up the photo from the jar. It was grainy, low light, but Sheriff Daniels was in it, clear as day, standing beside Johnny Glass in a place that should have been empty, smiling. Gunnar lay down at the hearth, watching Cal with eyes that had already seen the cost of inaction. Cal poured a cup of coffee that went untouched. Then he whispered, almost to himself, almost to the dog. "You saw everything, didn't you?" Gunnar didn't move. But in the flicker of the firelight, his eyes looked like they were waiting for the next move, waiting for the moment the fight would begin. The wind had dropped after sundown, leaving a kind of silence that rang louder than any storm. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting long shadows against the cabin walls. Cal sat at the table, hunched over the old maps and scribbled notes, the jar from the hollow tree open beside him. Beside the crackle of the fire and the occasional creak of the floorboards, the only sound in the room was Gunnar's steady breathing near the door. Cal stared at a photograph for the 100th time. The sheriff, smiling under a ball cap, standing in the woods with a man who was supposed to be missing, Johnny Glass. The timestamp scribbled in Daniel's handwriting read, 3:02 a.m. Everything pointed to one thing. Sheriff Daniels wasn't just complicit. He was orchestrating something. Cal stood, stretched the tension out of his spine, and rubbed his eyes. He walked over to the stove, poured another cup of coffee, but didn't drink it. His stomach was too tight, too aware. Gunnar's ears twitched. Then he stood. "Something wrong?" Cal asked. Gunnar didn't bark, but his body had changed, stiff, alert, tail low, legs braced. His nose pointed toward the window. Then the sound came. A sharp crack, wood on wood. Something had hit the side of the cabin. Cal froze, breath caught in his chest. Another crack, this time closer, a thud against the porch steps. Gunnar let out a low, rising growl that came from deep in his chest. His hackles rose. He stood between Cal and the front door. Cal set the mug down and moved to the window, pulling the curtain aside half an inch. Darkness. Just black trees and snow. Nothing but stillness. Then a third thud. Sharp. Deliberate. Someone was throwing stones, not randomly, to provoke. He reached for the flashlight and clicked it off before it gave him away. Then, with careful hands, he unlocked the drawer beneath the bookshelf and pulled out the old pistol he'd found with Daniel's belongings. Checked the magazine. Loaded. Safety off. Gunnar paced now, claws tapping the wood. "Shh," Cal whispered. "Don't give us away." Gunnar let out another warning growl, low, measured. Cal's heart hammered as he knelt by the edge of the door, trying to control his breath. He lifted the edge of the curtain again and scanned the tree line. Nothing. Until... there. A flicker. Not in the open, but tucked deep between two pines, half hidden. Headlights. Dimmed. Parked facing away. They weren't trying to be seen, but they wanted to be heard. Cal reached for his phone. His fingers hovered over 911, and then Gunnar snapped. The dog barked once, loud and sharp, and then growled again, deeper this time, almost frantic. "Quiet," Cal hissed, startled. But Gunnar didn't stop. He lunged toward him, barking again, louder, body braced like he was fighting the decision itself. Cal's hand trembled over the keypad. And then it hit him. The timing. The way the stones were thrown, not to break in, but to bait him, to scare him into calling, to make him reach for the one man he should never trust. The sheriff. His breath caught in his throat. He let the phone drop to the table. Gunnar stopped barking instantly, tail still rigid, panting hard, watching him with eyes that were almost pleading. "You knew," Cal whispered. "You knew I was about to make the same mistake Daniel made." A knock, this time at the back door. One knock, then silence. Cal and Gunnar both turned as if pulled by the same wire. Gunnar moved first, padding silently through the kitchen, shoulders low, like a ghost. Cal followed, pistol raised, eyes trained on the dark frame of the back door. He waited. No more knocks, just silence. Cal moved slowly toward the corner window, crouched low, and lifted the edge of the curtain. There it was again, a figure, just past the woodshed, motionless, watching the cabin. He ducked. Every hair on his body stood on end. He backed away from the window and pulled the curtain shut. "Whoever they are," he whispered, "they know we're here. They know I know." He looked down at Gunnar. "You kept me from walking into it." The dog didn't blink, didn't move, just stood watch by the door. Cal stayed awake the rest of the night, sitting in the far corner of the room, pistol resting across his lap, eyes trained on the windows. Gunnar stayed with him, side by side, both of them listening. But no one else came. By dawn, the forest looked untouched, pristine, as if the night had never happened. But the tracks in the snow said otherwise. Boot prints, 2 sets, one by the front steps, another leading away from the back door. Both sets disappeared into the tree line, right where the headlights had been. Cal followed them just far enough to know they weren't random hunters or hikers. They had waited, watched, then vanished. He returned to the cabin, breath steaming in the cold. They had wanted him to call the sheriff. They wanted him to hand himself over, and if Gunnar hadn't stopped him, he might have. Inside, Cal sat by the fire, staring at the flames that flickered like memories across the log walls. He ran a hand over Gunnar's fur, slow and deliberate. "You saved me again," he said. "Twice now." The dog lowered his head onto his paws. Quiet now, his job done, for the moment. Cal looked back toward the window. There was no more room for doubt. This wasn't paranoia. This was a hunt. And he had just become the prey, but not without a sentinel at his side, one who had seen war, one who had already lost a master, and wasn't about to lose another. It was mid-morning when the knock came. Not like the ones from 2 nights ago, not meant to provoke or threaten. This one was lighter, hesitant. 2 raps, followed by silence. Cal was at the kitchen table, sharpening the old hunting knife he'd found under the sink. Eyes still bloodshot from the night he spent tracking footprints through snow. Gunnar raised his head from the rug by the hearth, ears pricked, body alert but not tense. The dog didn't growl. That alone made Cal pause. Another knock, this time followed by a voice, muffled but clear. "Cal Thompson?" "I'm Laura Grant. I'm a friend of Daniel's." "I came for Gunnar." Cal stood slowly. Gunnar was already up, tail twitching. Not with aggression, but with something unfamiliar. Recognition. Cal opened the door a few inches, one hand resting near the handle of the pistol holstered at his side. A woman stood bundled in a canvas coat, snow on her shoulders, cheeks flushed from the cold. Her eyes were sharp, cautious, but kind. She didn't flinch when she saw the man with the weathered face and war-worn eyes staring back at her. "Daniel told me if anything happened, I was supposed to come here," she said quietly. "Not just for Gunnar." Gunnar padded forward. Cal tensed, but instead of bristling or barking, the dog wagged his tail and nosed Laura's thigh. She dropped to one knee instantly, her gloved hand finding the scar beneath Gunnar's ear like she'd done it 100 times. "Still got that hitch in your back leg, huh?" she murmured. "You stubborn old mutt." Gunnar leaned into her touch. Cal exhaled slowly, stepped back, and opened the door wider. "Come in." She did, shedding her coat, revealing a sweatshirt with the logo of a veterinary clinic from 2 counties over. She carried a battered canvas satchel marked with a red cross, which she placed gently near the fire. I'm guessing you're Cal. I am. I'm sorry we're meeting like this. Cal nodded, unsure what to say. He watched as Laura knelt beside Gunnar, checking his leg, his joints, his ribs. The dog stayed perfectly still, eyes half-lidded, tail thumping the floor in slow rhythm. He doesn't let anyone touch him, Cal said. You're the first since I got here. Laura smiled faintly. Daniel called me every time Gunnar needed help. Usually didn't even have to say his name, just, it's time, and I'd drive up. Cal leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. You two were close. Not in the way you're thinking. He saved my life once. There was this guy, drunk, angry, cornered me outside the bar near the rail tracks. Daniel didn't say a word, just stepped between us and didn't blink. After that, I owed him. She stood, wiping her hands on her jeans. So when he gave me this, she reached into her satchel and pulled out a small black hard drive. I knew it mattered. Cal's breath caught. He gave you that before he died? A week before. Told me if I ever heard his name spoken in the past tense, I was to bring it here. To you, he reached for the drive, felt its weight in his palm. He couldn't explain why it felt heavier than it should have. Like the moment he touched it, the air in the room got thicker. He didn't tell you what was on it? Laura shook her head. Only that it could get him killed. And maybe you too. Cal walked to the table, cleared a space among the notebooks and maps, and grabbed the old laptop from Daniel's office. It took 3 tries to boot it. When the screen finally lit, Laura stood beside him, Gunnar at her feet. They plugged in the drive. Dozens of folders appeared, each labeled with dates, GPS tags, and cryptic titles. The most recent was just 3 weeks before Daniel's death. Inside, one file, a video. Cal clicked it. The screen went black for a moment. Then night vision green flared to life. Heavy breathing filled the audio. The lens shook as Daniel whispered, "They're meeting again." Same spot. If you're watching this, God help me. The camera steadied, propped against a log or a pack. Figures appeared between trees, blurry but moving. 5 men. Cal recognized 2 from the diner, another from the gas station, and in the center, unmistakable in build and gait, Sheriff Mark Daniels. Cal's jaw clenched. The sheriff paced, speaking in a low, calm voice. One man knelt in the snow, hands zip-tied behind his back, face bloodied, eyes swollen shut. "You had your chance," the sheriff said. "You should have kept quiet." One of the deputies raised a pistol. The shot rang out through the laptop's speakers, cracking into the silence of the cabin like a whip. The man collapsed. The sheriff stepped forward, checked for a pulse, then nodded. "Dump him in the river." No mistakes. The screen shook again, as Daniel must have pulled the camera away. Then silence. Cal clicked pause. The room felt like it had stopped breathing. Laura was pale. She covered her mouth. "They killed him," she whispered. "Execution," Cal said. "Straight out." Covered up. Probably not the first time his hands shook as he closed the laptop, pushing it away like it might burn him. He looked at Laura. "We have to get this to someone. Someone outside Pine Hollow. Fed state authorities." "I have a contact in Salem," she said. "Works with internal affairs. I'll send the file now. Back it up to the cloud." She pulled out her phone, her hands shaking too, and began transferring the file. Cal sat down hard, the weight of what he'd seen pressing into his chest. He looked at Gunnar. "You were there." The dog stared back, eyes deep and unreadable. "You watched him film that. You watched him die knowing he couldn't trust anyone but you." Gunnar didn't blink, just lay down at Cal's feet like he had on that first night. Silent, waiting, not for permission, but for orders. Laura stood, pocketing her phone. "If they find out we have this, they'll come fast." "We don't have long," Cal nodded. He picked up the drive, turned it over in his hand. Daniel had known they'd come, but he had also known who to trust. Not the law, not the system, just a wounded brother. And a dog that had never stopped guarding the truth. The first explosion shattered the quiet like a rifle shot. Cal jolted upright, heart pounding, as the blast echoed across the valley. Heat rushed through the cabin walls a second later. A sharp whoosh followed, the unmistakable sound of fire catching dry timber. He didn't need to look. He already knew. They'd come. Flames began licking at the windows, casting frantic shadows across the walls. Smoke poured in through the cracks beneath the door, black and suffocating. "Laura!" Cal yelled, scrambling from his cot. She was already at the laptop, frantically yanking the hard drive from its port and shoving it into her jacket. Gunnar stood beside her, tail stiff, growling low. His ears flicked toward the rear of the cabin, the back window, where the glass was cracking from the heat. Cal grabbed the go-bag they'd packed the night before, yanked open the trap door leading to the old root cellar. A fire escape had never been part of the cabin's design, but Daniel, paranoid, always thinking ahead, had reinforced the crawl space. "Down!" Cal barked. Laura jumped first. Cal tossed the bag, then followed. Gunnar hesitated for a split second as the ceiling above groaned and spit embers. Then he leapt after them. They crawled through soot and dirt, the fire roaring above, the earth trembling from the collapse of the front porch. When they emerged 20 yards behind the cabin, the sky glowed orange. The entire structure was aflame. "Keep low," Cal whispered. "They'll be watching the front." But before they could take another step, tires crunched behind them. Flashlights, voices. Laura's eyes widened. "Run!" Cal said. She did, but not fast enough. 2 men came from the tree line, both in sheriff's deputy jackets, guns drawn. Laura screamed as one yanked her down and zip-tied her wrists. Gunnar lunged, but Cal whistled sharply. "Stay." It was a command wrapped in pain. They watched helplessly as she was shoved into the back of a black SUV. Then a voice called out from the darkness. Sheriff Daniels stepped into the firelight. His face was flushed, sweat shining off his forehead. His tone, though, was calm, controlled. "Calvin Thompson," he said, loud enough to carry. "Let's end this little game." Cal stayed hidden, his hand gripping Gunnar's collar. "I've got your friend," Daniels called. "And if you care about her, you'll bring me the drive." Right now, Gunnar growled low. Cal could feel the dog's body vibrating with tension. "Last chance?" Daniels said. "Hand it over, and I let her go. Try to be a hero, and I'll put her in the same grave as your brother." Gunnar's ears twitched, and then he bolted. "Gunnar, no!" But the dog was already in motion, cutting through the smoke and brush like a missile. 2 deputies spotted him and raised their weapons. One fired. The shot cracked across the forest. Gunnar stumbled mid-stride, but he didn't fall. Instead, he surged forward, blood trailing from his side, and tackled the nearest deputy in a blur of fur and fury. The man went down screaming as Gunnar sank his teeth into the arm holding the weapon. The other deputy turned to shoot. That's when Cal made his move. He flanked from the left, staying low, grabbed a rock the size of a cantaloupe, and slammed it into the shooter's temple. The man dropped instantly. Gunnar dragged the first deputy into the brush, snarling, then backed off at Cal's sharp command. Laura was still in the SUV, shouting behind the glass. Daniels had disappeared. "Get her out," Cal ordered. Gunnar, limping but alive, obeyed. He leapt onto the hood and began smashing the windshield with his front paws. Cal pulled the door open from the other side and cut Laura free with the hunting knife. "Where is he?" she asked, breathless. Cal pointed toward the ridge. "Running scared." They didn't follow. Not yet. Not until Cal triggered the last part of his plan. He'd seen the tripwires days ago, Daniel had built a perimeter system, tiny charges wired to motion sensors disguised among the pines. Cal hadn't planned to use them. But now? He led Laura and Gunnar back toward the trailhead, reached into the go bag, and activated the old remote Daniel had labeled Scarecrow. A second explosion rocked the ridge. Screams followed. Cal waited until silence returned. Then he looked down at Gunnar. The dog was breathing heavy, blood soaking into his fur, but his eyes were clear. Focused. He hadn't saved them. He'd fought for them. Bleeding, limping, and never once hesitating. Laura knelt beside him, wrapping her arms gently around his neck. "You insane, beautiful dog," she whispered. "You just saved all of us." Cal checked the perimeter. No movement. Then he looked back at the burning cabin. What was once a home, once a shelter for the truth, was now ashes. But it didn't matter, because what they had now, the drive, the evidence, and each other, was more powerful than a building. And Gunnar? He wasn't just a survivor anymore, he was a soldier again, still standing, still fighting, and far from done. Morning broke with smoke still hanging in the trees. The mountain felt quieter than usual, like it was holding its breath. Cal stood at the trailhead. The hard drive zipped inside his jacket, the burn marks on his arms stinging with each movement. Laura was behind him, bruised but steady. The fire had gutted the cabin, but the plan had worked. Sheriff Daniels had walked into it blind. He came limping out of the woods an hour after sunrise, face slick with ash and blood, his badge missing, his gun gone. He was alone. Cal didn't speak. He didn't move. Daniels raised his hands, slow and shaky. "You win," he rasped. Gunnar barked once, sharp and full of authority. That was when the state police emerged from the ridge behind them, weapons raised, voices clipped and precise. Helicopter rotors beat faintly overhead. The roar of backup that Cal had triggered after the fire was arriving right on cue. Daniels dropped to his knees. They cuffed him on the spot. He didn't resist. Cal should have felt victorious. Instead, he turned to Gunnar. The dog was sitting now, his breathing shallow, front paw curled beneath him awkwardly. Blood still seeped through the gauze Laura had wrapped around his torso. His tail gave a faint wag when Cal knelt beside him. "You did it," Cal whispered, pressing his forehead to Gunnar's. The dog's eyes stayed locked with his. And then, something shifted. Gunnar gave one final exhale, a long, low sound that wasn't quite a growl, not quite a sigh, somewhere between warning and goodbye. His body trembled once, then went still. Cal froze. Laura gasped softly behind him. The sounds of the arrest, the shouts, the cuffs clicking into place, all of it faded into the background. Cal reached out, laid a hand on the dog's chest. No rise, no breath. The world narrowed to that one stillness. He tried to speak, but nothing came. Not at first, then he broke. For the first time in more years than he could remember, tears came freely. Not just tears of grief, but of guilt, of memory, of everything he had locked away the day his brother died. He pulled Gunnar close, arms wrapped around the dog's limp body, and sobbed into the fur still warm beneath his cheek. Laura dropped to her knees beside him, silent. No one else approached. Even the troopers gave them space. It was Gunnar who had led them here. It was Gunnar who had refused to run, who had pulled Cal out of his hiding place, out of his fear, and into the fight. He was more than a dog. He was a guardian, a brother, a soldier. And now, he was gone. Cal sat there for a long time, holding the body, his jaw clenched, shoulders shaking. He remembered Daniel's words, scrawled in the margins of a notebook they found in the old cabin. "If it ever comes to the fire, Gunnar will know what to do. Just trust him. He's braver than either of us." and Gunnar had been. Braver than California. Braver than most men. Eventually, Cal lifted his head. The sun had fully risen, casting long golden beams across the blackened clearing. A hawk soared overhead, silent and high. He looked down at Gunnar, brushed the soot from the dog's snout. "I'm done running," he said. Laura reached for his hand. Together they rose. The truth was safe. Daniels was in custody. The evidence was in federal hands now. But the cost? It lay quietly at Cal's feet, fur matted, eyes closed. A hero without medals, without applause, just loyalty. And a final howl that echoed in Cal's chest long after the woods fell quiet again. The scorched earth around the cabin had started to breathe again. Wild grass pushed through the charred soil. The air smelled of pine and morning dew instead of smoke. The silence no longer felt hollow. Cal stayed. He could have gone anywhere. The federal agents had offered him a clean start out of state. His record was cleared, his name no longer whispered in courtrooms or chased by bounty boards. But when he looked at the map, his finger kept circling back to the Oregon woods, to the cabin where Daniel had left pieces of himself behind, to the place Gunnar had chosen to fight and fall. So Cal rebuilt. Not the way it had been, not a replica, but something new, stronger, a frame walls, reinforced foundation, new wiring, a proper well pump. Yet in the center of it all, untouched, was the hand-carved wooden plaque Daniel had made years ago. Truth stands where courage does. Cal sanded and re-oiled it, then mounted it above the new front door. A few months later, the non-profit paperwork came through. The Grant Gunner Fund, a program dedicated to supporting retired military working dogs and veterans dealing with PTSD. Laura helped coordinate the veterinary side. Cal handled logistics, grant reviews, transport networks. He never asked for attention, just impact. People started showing up, quiet men with scars, women who spoke little but watched everything, dogs with cloudy eyes and worn-down joints. They found their way to the cabin like moths to a dim but steady flame. One crisp October morning, Laura pulled up in her truck and called out, "Got something for you." From the passenger seat, a puppy bounded out, a ball of tan and black fur, ears too big for his head, tail wagging like it was powered by caffeine. Cal blinked. "He's a handful," Laura warned, grinning. "But I think he's meant to be yours." The pup trotted straight to Cal and flopped on his boots, belly up. No hesitation. Cal knelt, ran a hand through the thick fur. "You're not a gunner," he said softly. "But you're something." The dog looked up at him, eyes sharp, waiting. Justice, Cal decided. And that was that. By spring, the cabin was more than home. It was sanctuary. They had a fenced-in run, a training field, a shaded grove with memorial stones for the ones who'd served and gone. Gunner's stone stood at the center. The engraving was simple. Loyal, brave, loved. Some nights, Cal sat beside it in the dark, sipping coffee. Justice curled at his feet and let the silence tell him everything he needed to know. But this night was different. Tonight the stars were sharp against the black sky, and the wind smelled of river silt and cedar bark. Cal sat on the porch steps, legs stretched out, a blanket wrapped loosely over his shoulders. Justice's head rested on his thigh, warm and heavy. A soft snore rose from the pup's chest. Cal looked out at the dark treetops, listening. He thought of Daniel's laugh, of Gunner's bark, of the way the fire crackled when everything was coming down. But they still stood. He thought of how close he'd come to staying broken, and how it was a dog who had refused to let him. His hand moved automatically to Justice's head. The pup stirred, looked up. Cal smiled faintly. "You know," he said, voice low, Some stories don't need to be loud. They just need to be true. Justice blinked. Cal let the silence stretch, then added, almost to himself, "So what about you out there?" He glanced toward the camera Laura had insisted they mount last week. For the non-profit's news site, for the folks who wanted updates, for the people they'd never meet but might still help. I leaned in slightly. "What's your story with a loyal pet?" He didn't wait for an answer. He just sat back. Justice let out a tiny huff, then settled in again. Tomorrow would be more calls, more outreach, more work. But tonight was quiet. And for the first time in years, that quiet didn't ache. It healed. If Gunner's story moved you, if you've ever known a dog who stood by you when no one else did, support the mission. Like, share. Subscribe to German Shepherd Chronicles, where loyalty lives on, because some heroes have 4 legs, and their stories deserve to be told.